Chapter 10. The Impressionist unfolded the sheet of paper he kept in his pocket at all times. Right front pants pocket. All the time. That way, he always knew where it was. He didn't really need the paper anymore. He had long since memorized its contents, not merely the words in the correct order, but also the particulars of the handwriting itself, the loops of the O's, the jagged slashes of the F's and T's. He was certain that, if called upon, he could reproduce the contents of the paper right down to the tiny stutter in the word field. The stutter where the pen had clogged for an instant and made a slight skip and an almost imperceptible blotch on the paper before once again giving a smooth line. The paper held the Impressionist's instructions. They were sacred to him. No matter how well he knew those instructions, he would never throw away that paper. So far, he had followed his instructions precisely to the letter, with one exception, of course. The boy, Jasper Dent. The next morning, Tuesday morning, the Impressionist sat in the coffee shop on Main Street in Lobos Nod, thinking of wolves and sheep in sheep's clothing, thinking of the Trojan horse, thinking too of his next victim. He wondered idly, for it did not matter greatly one way or the other if the boy had found the ring yet. He had followed Jasper enough to puzzle out that the boy was running his own investigation beyond the sheriff's. The Impressionist wasn't particularly worried about either of them actually catching him. That just wouldn't happen. But he knew that the sheriff would never find the ring. Tanner was burned out after catching one serial killer and didn't have the chops to catch a second. Jasper might find the ring, but then what? Would he be able to decipher its meaning in time? In the meantime, his next victim lived here in town. In fact, he could summon her now easily, and did so with a single raised finger. The waitress came to him, flashing him a quick, practiced smile. Helen, her name tag read. Helen, he was sure, was thinking of nothing more than refilling his coffee, and then maybe retreating into the kitchen for a moment's respite before taking the orders of 3 college-age kids who just stumbled through the door with the air of demanding, hungover hunger. Thank you, the Impressionist said to her with great earnestness. Her practiced smile widened into something a bit more genuine. Maybe this guy would be worth more of a tip than the usual cheapskates left. The Impressionist, for his part, returned her smile, then watched her refill his coffee, watched the tendons in her forearm go taut, watched the bend of her wrist, watched her slender, elegant fingers on the handle of the carafe. Her fingers, just noticing. Chapter 11. That same morning, Jas, running on only 5 hours' sleep, blew off both coffee with Howie and homeroom to return to the sheriff's office. It wasn't quite 8, and Lana hadn't come in yet for the morning shift. A lone deputy sat at a desk in a corner, mousing around on a website. Deputy Erickson was nowhere to be seen, which made Jas gladder than he'd like to admit. He walked past the empty receptionist's desk and straight back to G. Williams' office. G. William, an early riser, was always the first person in the office, and today was no exception. Where's the new guy? Jas asked, as he barged in without knocking. Figured he'd be an early bird, catching the worm, all that stuff. Even deputies get days off, Jas, G. Williams said. I'm willing to bet you're not here to check the man's time card, though. I figured it out, Jas announced. He tossed a plastic sandwich bag on G. Williams' desk. He taped it shut and stuck a label on it recording where and when he'd found the toe ring. G. William flicked a glance at the ring and then pushed it aside. A little early in the morning for shenanigans, Jas. Okay with you if I get my coffee first? I figured out who Jane Doe is, Jas said in disbelief, following G. William to the office ancient coffee machine. It reeked of years of burned coffee. Don't you care? G. William said nothing as he poured the day's first coffee into his cup. He said nothing as he took his first sip, winced so much his mustache quivered, then marched back into his office and planted himself behind his desk. And he still said nothing as he nursed a swallow of more coffee and finally held up the makeshift evidence bag, squinting at the ring within. "I don't want to hear you tell me you went to the crime scene," G. Williams said. "In fact, if I hear you tell me that, I'll have to do official things. You read me?" Jas fidgeted for a moment, then said, "I was at the creek, on the Harrison property. That's not technically the crime scene, although it should have been from the start." He couldn't keep a note of haughty disdain out of his voice. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Her initials are F.G., Jas said, determined to prove to G. William that he knew what he was doing. "The ring's inscription. It took me a while, but I figured it out. It looks like a code. Howie said it looks like a robot's name, but it's a dedication. 4FG from DR. Weird to get a toe ring engraved, I guess, but takes all kinds, right? You can do a cross-check on national databases for missing persons with the initials." "Her name's Fiona Goodling," G. Williams said in a flat tone. "Went missing 2 weeks ago outside Atlanta. Boyfriend's name is Doug Reed. Occasionally, if you let us use both hands and a flashlight, we poor pathetic cops can find our own asses." Jas felt a shameful blush burn across both cheeks and touch as far back as his ears. "Oh," was all he could think of to say. She spent her summers teaching swim classes for kids at the YMCA, so she had to have a background check, fingerprinting, the whole 9 yards. "I got the call from IAFIS last night at home. Was just about to call her family." Jas could still think of nothing to say. He'd been so convinced that he knew better than the cops what was going on that he was the only one who could crack this case. And now he felt withered under G. Williams' stare. It was one thing to defy the sheriff, breach a crime scene, and interfere with an investigation if you were the only hope. It was another thing entirely when all you did was confirm what the cops already knew. G. Williams stared at him, as if daring him to speak, and Jas decided that he wasn't afraid of G. William. "Is Atlanta PD going to set up a task force? You'll need to be involved. You—" "Jas," G. Williams said in a not unkind tone of voice, "you got serious killers on the brain, kid. And I understand that, but this isn't a serial killer. Cutting off the fingers, serial killers," G. William went on as if he hadn't been interrupted, "have well-defined comfort zones that they kill in, jeopardy surfaces. No serial killer is going to kill a woman in Atlanta and then drive her body all the way here to dump it. It's too far out of his home turf." "Billy had a comfort zone the size of the country," Jas snarled. "The size of the world. You should know that. You, of all people." The sheriff's expression hardened. Whatever reservoir of sympathy he had for Jas, it wasn't deep enough to put up with that kind of backtalk. "Her family will appreciate getting this back." He gestured to the toe ring. "And I'm warning you, stay the hell out of my crime scenes. You have to go public. You have to leak that someone saw something that night. Force the guy to come in and give some excuse for why he was seen there. That's how you—" "Don't tell me my business," G. William thundered, raising from his chair. His face went white to red to purple in less than a second. "Don't you dare tell me. Not when it comes to this." Jas backed up to the door. "There will be more killings," he said as darkly as he knew how. For Billy Dunn's son, that was pretty dark. G. Williams seemed visibly shaken. "I gave you a warning. Heed it. And isn't today a school day?" Jas opened his mouth to speak, but knew that whatever he said would be lost on G. William. So instead, he left. Jas got to school halfway through first period and tried to persuade the assistant principal that he'd had car trouble and couldn't make it on time. Usually, he could charm his way into or out of just about anything, but this morning he was rattled and off his game, and the bags under his eyes gave him away. The assistant principal gave him a nice try and sent him off to second period. The bell had rung by then, with an admonition not to stay up partying all night. If only she'd known what Jazz had really been doing the night before. He saw Howie in the hallway and told him what G. William had said, but now that they had the victim's name, Jane Doe, was old news to him. "I just want to know when my new tattoo happens, man." "Oh, right." Jazz's skin was already crawling at the thought of it. "I'm sort of busy right now, Howie. Maybe next week." He grumbled and growled his way through school. Connie tried to soothe him, but he was having none of it. "I got out-investigated by G. William," he told her at lunch. They were outside on the front lawn of the school, huddled under a tree together for shade from the fall sun. It was late October, just chilly enough that the lawn was sparsely populated and they had privacy. "That's bad enough, but he still doesn't believe me when I say it's a serial killer." "First of all," she told him, offering him a grape, which he accepted, "look at it this way. He's got the whole world of law enforcement behind him, and you just had Howie, but you still kept up with him. Second of all, I am still going to kick your butt for going out and doing something that stupid after you said you wouldn't. Third of all, maybe he's right. Maybe you're too quick to think it's a serial killer, which makes perfect sense," she added. "And fourth of all," she finished, "I'm going to kick your butt for going out like that last night after you said you wouldn't." "You said that twice." "Then I will kick your butt twice." But she really got angry when he told her that he couldn't come to play practice. The school had a very strict policy. Students who missed a day or part of a day without an excuse could not participate in extracurricular activities that same day. Jazz was forbidden to attend rehearsal. Ginny found him in the hallway just as school was ending and cornered him. She was a tiny thing, barely 5 feet tall, but her acting training gave her an outsized presence. "Jasper? Do you remember the first day of auditions?" Yes." He looked around for a way out. There was none. "I guess Connie ratted me out." "Don't try to distract me. Do you remember when I said that being in this play was a commitment? That it was a commitment to me and to your fellow actors and to yourself?" "Sure do." He had a vague recollection. "Then why are you letting me down today? Why are you letting your castmates down? Most important of all, why are you letting yourself down?" Jazz groaned inside. Guilt trips rarely worked on him, but he knew what was expected of him, so he played his part. "I'm really sorry," he said, "but look, I've been off book longer than anyone else. I'm not going to lose anything between today and tomorrow." "It's not about that, Jasper. It's about you living up to your word. It's about you being there for the other people in the play who are counting on you." "I'm really sorry," Jazz said again, this time ramping up the sincerity. He had more important things to do than bang words with Connie, with Ginny Davis, and her teeny tiny anger. She was such a comical figure that Jazz almost wanted to pick her up by the waist and bob her up and down in the air, cooing, "Who's angry? Who's the angriest little one?" "It won't happen again," he promised, throwing out the most earnest, defeated, wounded expression in his arsenal. She melted in an instant, holding out her arms. Jazz froze. There was just no way in the world he would let her hug him. And then Ginny took advantage of her paralysis and threw her arms around him, squeezing him tight. And he felt everything. He was acutely aware of the pressure and the presence of her body, of the tickle of her curly hair just under his nose, of the small, firm, outthrust breast against his lower rib cage, of the smell of her. More than that, though, he was aware of the fragility of her breakability. He thought of his gloved hands at Fiona Goodling's neck, of the killer's gloved hands, of Billy's gloved hands, of trophies and fingers and knives. He was terrified of sex. Like every teenage boy, he was obsessed with it, of course, and wanted to have as much of it as humanly possible as soon as humanly possible. But unlike every teenage boy, he couldn't let himself. The very thought of it absolutely petrified him. Sex was like lighter fluid for people like him. Connie was safe because, well, Connie was safe. But Ginny felt warm and perfect and vulnerable. I'm sorry I had to be so rough on you," she said, backing away, utterly unaware of what she'd done to him. "Don't be late tomorrow, okay?"